I got it. There we go. There
There
we
you
go. Okay.
Perfect.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
Watch
Good
what you
job.
say.
thank you for that. Thank you, Angie, for talking me through.
Sure.
Anyway, here we are tonight to talk about St. Clare and St. Francis. And as you know, we had the blessing of the animals last Sunday. And I thought it would be interesting for us to talk more in depth about Francis and also St. Clare, which is kind of the saint that gets left behind with all the talk about Francis. And so tonight will be about Francis and Clare. This is a two-part class. And again, I always like to give a disclaimer. I'm not a scholar around St. Clare or St. Francis. I'm very interested in the saints. I visited Assisi, where Clare and Francis lived, and it's just a personal interest of mine, and I really enjoy sharing it with folks. So with that in mind, we will start. And we'll start with a prayer. This is a prayer from St. Francis of Assisi. Most High, glorious God, enlighten my heart and give me true faith, certain hope and perfect charity, sense and knowledge, that I may carry out your true and holy commandment. Amen. Okay. So here's what we'll talk about tonight. So we've got two classes tonight, October 17th. We'll talk about who are the saints. We'll talk about Assisi, Italy. We'll journey through Assisi and look at some of the sacred sites. And then tonight we'll have an introduction to Francis and Clare of Assisi. Next week, the 24th, we'll go more in depth around Francis and Clare. We'll also talk about Franciscan spirituality and then lessons for our own time. So who are the saints? So we have quite a history in the Episcopal Church, in Anglicanism, Catholicism, Christianity in general, that we have saints who we admire, saints who we think about, saints who we try to imitate. And so I have a couple quotes that I wanted to share with you about who the saints are. And this comes from the book Lesser Feasts and Fasts. And it's the 2022 version. It's the newest version of this book. And this book deals with the saints and their feast days. It's from the Episcopal Church. So what we say about the saints is part of our Christian history is to honor people whose lives represent commitment to Christ and borne witness to their faith. And then, I love this one. In the saints, we're not dealing with the absolutes of perfection, but human lives in all their diversity, open to the movement of the Spirit. So clearly the saints are very, very human people, just like we are. There is probably a saint among us tonight, whoever that might be. Saints have human qualities. Saints lose their tempers, saints make mistakes, all those things. A couple more things about saints. Many a holy life, when carefully examined, will reveal flaws or the bias of a particular moment in history or ecclesial perspective. It should encourage us to realize that the saints, like us, are first and foremost, it should say human. First and foremost human. And as Christ said to St. Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. So again, just this qualifier that the saints are not perfect people, they're human people. And we may look back sometimes at the saints and say, well, you did this thing 200 or 300 or 500 years ago, we think that was horrible. And we wouldn't honor you for that. But in the saints' time, it was probably the right thing to do. So we have to give it that perspective. Well, I wanted to talk about traditional saints. So, when we think of saints in the tradition of sainthood, we think of St. Paul. St. Paul, the apostle who we had a class on last year, or Bridget of Kildare of Ireland, who's the patron saint of cats and fires and was an abbess. Or we think of St. Mark, or St. Joan of Arc, or Julian of Norwich, or St. Augustine. We might think of those, but there are more recent saints, and I just wanted to mention 4 of them because these are contemporary saints. And again, I think it's just a good reminder that saints come to us in our lifetime. So while we might look back at saints, we also need to look at our contemporary society and also know that there will be saints in life going forward. So the first one is Polly Murray. And Polly Murray was a civil rights activist and an advocate. She was a legal scholar. She was an author. And then later in her life, she became an Episcopal priest. And she worked very much as part of the civil rights movement. And she also worked a lot around legal protection for gender equity. And she is a saint in the Episcopal Church. Florence Lee Tim O. Florence was the first woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest. She was ordained in Hong Kong. She was ordained right before the Japanese invaded Hong Kong. This was 1944. And I know we talk about ordination of women in the Episcopal Church happening 40 plus years ago. But Florence was ordained in the Anglican Communion, the first woman to be ordained in 1944. She served the people of Hong Kong as a priest. Interestingly, when the war was over, she resigned her priesthood. And we really don't know the whole backstory on that, if she was forced to or decided to resign or rescind her priesthood for other reasons. Thurgood Marshall, also a saint in the Episcopal Church. Y'all know who he is, I think. He's a civil rights lawyer. He served as the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in 1967 through 91. He was the Supreme Court's first African-American justice. He fought for civil rights. He was part of the NAACP Defense Fund. He worked to end racial segregation, and he argued the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. So also a saint. And then Oscar Romero, who was the bishop of the Archdiocese of San Salvador in El Salvador. And I think you also know his story, but he spoke out a lot against social injustice, against the indigenous people and the violence and all those things. And he was assassinated as he lifted the host in church. He was assassinated by members of the Salvadorian military government at the time. So he is also a saint. So again, contemporary people who are known to us, who are considered saints for the actions that they took as followers of Jesus. If you have any questions, just ask me, okay? So let's meet Francis and St. Clare, St. Francis and St. Clare. So here are some depictions of them. Here is Clare, and here is Francis. These are icon depictions of them. Time was well before photographs, so we don't have any photographs, so we have to rely on icons and paintings and that sort of thing. So they're both from Assisi, Italy. They're contemporaries. Clare is born somewhere around 1193 to 1194. She lives to the year 1253. She dies when she's age 59. Francis is born about 1181 or 82. He lives till 1226. He dies about age 45. I wanted to point out the difference, the 1 year difference in the date. The reason for that is sometimes in European cultures or other cultures, but this was true of the culture of Italy, that they begin their year of birth when a child is born. A child is 1 year old when they're born. And so sometimes you'll see these dates, 93, 94, where they're really not sure if the records indicate what the true date of birth, the person coming into the world was, or the date of the date of birth following the person coming into the world. So just a little bit of trivia. They're baptized in the same church in Assisi. San Rufino Cathedral, still there. We'll see some pictures of it. And then there were major class differences between Clare and Francis. Clare comes from a very noble family, very wealthy family. They're a member of the aristocratic government or the aristocracy. And Francis is from a cloth merchant family, and they're gaining wealth. They're becoming wealthy. And in Italian, it's popolo, which is the people, which included merchants, professionals. It didn't include serfs and agricultural workers. They really weren't considered people, interestingly enough, huh? So what do you notice? Let's look at the icon of Clare first. So what are things, remember that items in icons have a particular meaning. So let's look at some things here. So what do you think this means, the crozier that she's carrying?
She was a leader in the church.
Right. She's a church leader. She's actually an abbess. She becomes an abbess of the Order of the Poor Clares. And this is a sign of her authority and also her power, and that she would have quite a bit of say-so in terms of how things were going, not only in her order, but in Assisi and possibly the larger church. Okay, how about this? What does that look like? What does it look like is inside here?
Is that a monstrance?
It's a monstrance, right? A monstrance is something, it's often used in Roman Catholicism and was used during medieval times. It is a box, usually made of gold, and the consecrated host is put inside the box. And this is symbolic of something that happened in Clare's life, where there was an invasion in Assisi. And Clare went out, she went and got the monstrance with the host in it. And she went out and faced the warriors who were coming to attack. And she faced them with the consecrated bread. And it said that they were turned away, that they were turned away by the power and the spirit of seeing Christ. So that's a bit of a story about her. And we'll get more into that. And then look back here. What does that look like? So Clare is from, I'm sorry?
Assisi?
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Meredith. It's Assisi. So here is Assisi. This is Mount Subasso, which is one of the mountainous regions in Assisi. And so this frames where she's from, okay? Then if we go over to look at
I have a question
yeah,
about Clare.
Go ahead.
What's the significance of the cloth? Is she not supposed to actually be touching the monstrance?
Exactly. Thank you, Meredith. So when a monstrance is carried around, the priest or the person who's carry it has a stole, And they used the cloth of the stole to grip the base of the monstrance as they paraded around. And that's exactly what she's doing. I think it's also, it also is akin to the, the robe of Jesus, or that, the stories we have of Jesus' robe, or Jesus leaves his bindings in the tomb, the resurrected Christ. That may be a part of it as well. Great question.
The
Thanks.
holy oven mitts.
The holy oven mitts, right?
The holy oven mitts. What's in the top left corner? Is that her name? Saint
Yes,
Clare, or
it says Saint Clare of Assisi.
in
Yeah,
what?
it's in written in English, but it's vertical. So STCLARE of Assisi, ASSIS, right here. Okay, okay. All right. The other thing about Saint Clare is an Italian. Her name is Chiara. And Chiara means light or brilliance or clarity. Okay, Chiara. Then let's talk about Francis. Here's the icon of Francis. Great story about Francis. His mother and father were two nobles, or I'm sorry, they were in the merchant business. His dad goes to France, and he comes back, and in the meantime, his wife has had Francis. Francis is a little baby, and his wife has christened Francis, baptized Francis, Giovanni. And St. Francis's father didn't want him to be named Giovanni. He had been in France, and he wanted to name him Francesco, after the French. And so he had his name changed. And so St. Francis would have been St. Giovanni if it had not been for his father's intervention. He wanted his son to be named after the French because the French were wealthy. Francis's father was trading with the French, and he wanted to add that to the family's background. Okay, so Francis, or Giovanni, becomes Francis. So what do you notice about this icon of Francis? Let's look here. What's this right here?
The mountain?
It's Mount Subasso, right? It's Mount Subasso, which identifies him as being in Assisi. And then there are other things around him.
A lot of animals.
A lot of animals, right?
A lot of animals, yeah.
Right. A lot of animals. He writes the canticle of the creatures and so forth. And so all the animals are around him. This is a more contemporary icon. What do you notice about his head?
Shaved.
It's shaved, right? Right. So as a monk, he has a tonsure, right?
What's that?
A tonsure is Franciscan monks do this today. They shave a circle in their head. It's part of their saying that they're under God's care and influence, and also that hair is worldly, and so you shave it off.
It's almost the opposite of like a yarmulke. It's that
It is, isn't it?
that
Yes.
there's absolutely nothing between you and God.
Yeah. Yeah.
But is that black band? Is that hair?
Uh-huh.
Yes, it's hair. Yeah. Yeah.
Are his hands bandaged?
I was wondering that too.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so that's a great question, and great for noticing that. So Francis later in his life received the stigmata, and the stigmata are the holes in your hands and feet that happened to Jesus on the cross.
Okay.
And so it's said that Francis received the stigmata as well, a sign of being Christ-like. And so that's why his hands are bandaged. Great observation. Great observation. Couple of other things. You notice the wolf right here?
Yes.
So, the story of Francis and the wolf?
No.
So Francis gets a call from a neighboring village who says, the wolf is coming into our village at night and dragging our children away and eating them. So Francis goes to investigate, and he finds out that the village is growing and the villagers are clearing the land and they're infringing on the wolf's territory. And the wolf has nothing to eat because they're taking land and taking land and taking land. And so he goes out and he searches for the wolf, and he and the wolf have a conversation. And the wolf says, I don't want to eat the children, but the villagers have taken my land and they're taking my food. And so I don't have anything to eat, which is why I'm coming into the village at night and eating the children.
Wow.
And Francis and the wolf have a conversation. And Francis says, if I convince the people in the village to not take so much of your animals and to feed you, will you stop eating the children? And you'll often see an icon of the wolf licking Francis's hand as a sign that they have this agreement, right? So as the story goes, Francis goes back to the village and he tells the people and he says, the wolf only came to eat your children because you took all its food. But if you put food out for the wolf, stop taking all the wolf's food in the forest, then the wolf not only will stop eating your children, but the wolf will protect you. And as the story goes, the wolf hung out in the little town and protected everybody in the village and never ate any more children.
That's so contemporary.
Yeah. Well, and you know, if you think exactly, if you think about the lessons for today, right? That if we take the natural habitat, what do animals do? They wander into
Right.
you know, residents, deers crash through
They
screen
survive.
doors
They
and
try to survive.
yeah, exactly.
And there's
Exactly.
a statue in that town of a wolf
Yes, there is.
Oh.
Yes, there is. Yep.
today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Let's keep going here. So Francis and Clare both have feast days. Francis' feast day is October 4th. And Francis is the patron saint of animals, as we know. He's also the patron saint of ecology. And in fact, to this day, meetings on ecology and creation care still take place in Assisi. It's a place where people come from all over the world to have discussions about ecology and also peace. He's also a patron saint of merchants because his family came from a merchant class, and also the patron saint of archaeologists because he repaired and reconstructed several churches. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Francis is one of two patron saints of Italy. So Francis is a patron saint along with Saint Catherine of Siena, who is also a patron saint of Italy. Now, interestingly enough, I found this fascinating. Francis is not the patron saint of Assisi. It's Saint Rufino. However, I don't recall that they really celebrate Saint Rufino in France, in Assisi, because everything is about Francis. There's a huge Francis Day celebration. But Saint Rufino was the first bishop. He converted the people of Assisi to Christianity. And so there is a church, a cathedral named after him, still in Assisi, called San Rufino, which I think is on its third resurrection. It's been built 3 times, but it's from the 1100s. Remember, this is where Francis and Clare are baptized. But, you know, most folks say the patron saint of Assisi is Francis. It's not. It's Saint Rufino. Clare is the patron saint of eye disease. Why? Because of her name, Chiara, clear and bright or brilliant. And so people who have eye disorders would pray to Saint Clare. She's also the patron saint of embroiderers because she was from a noble class, right? And part of what they would learn is beautiful embroidery work. So she and her sisters, when her order came together, she and her sisters did a lot of embroidery work, needlework, that sort of thing. So she's the patron saint of embroiderers. And also, she's the patron saint of television. Now, how can this
No.
be? How can
No.
this be? Yeah. So here's,
So ahead of her time.
I know.
She said,
Here's how she becomes the patron saint of television. So Claire had some sickness in her life, and it was a Christmas Eve, and she couldn't leave her bed to go to midnight mass. And so she had to stay in her room. And of course, this was well before Zoom or anything. And so it is said that she had a vision of exactly what was going on during the mass on the wall of her cell, on the wall of her room.
wow.
And so she became the patron saint of television in 1954. I think it
Wow.
was Pope, I want to say Pope Leo. I'm not sure I'm right on that. But the Pope of the time, right after TV had become quite popular, made her the patron saint of television. I love that. I love that,
First
right?
flat screen.
Yeah,
Flat screen.
that's right. That's
The
right.
flat screen.
And
The
then
flattest of
again,
them all.
yeah. Again, if we look at the icon, this is Francis and the Wolf, and you can see how they
Yeah.
become really good friends. And this is St. Clare holding the monstrance. Now, in this one, it's interesting because she's not holding a cloth around it. She's just holding it right in her hands.
Yeah.
So different interpretations by different artists. Any questions so far? All right.
Is there a saint of computers? Or
I'm sorry.
is there a saint of computers and stuff? I'm kind of
You know,
surprised there's a saint.
I'm sure there is. Claire is also the patron saint of telephones. So I wonder if she would be the patron saint. I'm going to have to do a little more research, Steve. I like that idea. Lord knows we need to pray to Claire, given what happens sometimes with our
Yeah.
computer, if she is the patron saint of computers.
Okay.
Okay. And I think to keep in mind, over the years, over many years, many millennium, not millennium, but many years, sometimes people are confused about praying to a particular saint. And what we're called to do is you can pray for intercession through a saint. Folks for a period of time felt like they weren't worthy to pray directly to Jesus or directly to God. And so you would pray through a saint to intercede for you through Jesus or for God, to God, for whatever need that you might have.
So apparently, Saint Isidore of Seville is the patron saint of computers, programmers, and the internet as a whole.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Auntie
you.
and I are on the Google.
Please.
Saint Isidore. Okay. I'm gonna make a note of that. Thank you. Thank you, researchers, Meredith and Angie.
Google's never far away.
Okay. I wanted to just give you an idea of the geography. So here we have Italy today and what Italy looks like. And here is Assisi, right? It's right here.
Mhm.
It's kind of right in the middle of Italy. Here is Rome, okay? Here is Milan in northern Italy. Here's the boot of Italy, Pompeii. Here is Sicily. So Assisi is
Florence up here.
right here. Yep, and Florence is right here.
Oh.
Assisi is right here, okay? This is contemporary Italy. But in the 11th century, when Francis and Clare were around, it was more regions and territories and communes. Commune, I mean like communities. And so this is where Assisi would be in the Duchy of Spoleto. You've heard of the Spoleto Festival.
Mhm.
Still happens today. It's a music and art festival that happens. And notice here are the papal states, where the Pope had control. Notice how huge it is. The Vatican today is very, very small. So there were wars fought to gain a lot of this land back. Here is Tuscany, would have been Tuscany, okay? Lombard, is here. Byzantine, Apula, Salerno, and Byzantine, Calabria, and then Sicily. So these were territories or regions, and people were furious about the region that they came from. Have you ever watched Italian soccer?
Yeah.
And you know that they're from, there's regional issues there, and they fight and carry on about these regional soccer teams, right? And that's, I think, a carryover from these times. And so people were very territorial, and this is where Francis and Clare would have come out of, this sense of territories. The territories fought. There were wars that would happen between the territories over land rights, fights, those sorts of things. And so while today we might think of Italy as one united country, although the people of Italy right now, even now, have big differences between the South and the North and who's in the center. And the people in Milan think everyone else in Italy, especially the people in the South, are dragging the economy down and taking all the money from the Milanese. Anyway, the stories are kind of the same. So there would have been fights and wars going on with these states as well.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
the reclamation of land of the Papal States?
Mhm.
Wouldn't that have just been seen as like going to war against God in some way? I'm sure the church had to spin it like that.
Yeah, you know, that's a good question, Angie. I don't know the answer. I think it was part of a peasant uprising. And I know I have a great grandfather who fought with Garibaldi to reclaim land from the Pope.
Wow.
And yeah, and I have an article about him that was written a lot of years ago. He lived to be 103. And I just don't know enough about it, but I know that it was an uprising of the people because a lot of the prime agricultural land had been taken, and it
Mhm.
was being used by the Pope and other wealthy people.
Yeah.
And the peasants were starving. So let me do a little research on that. That's a great question. Okay. A little bit about Assisi. So it is a small, even present day Assisi. It's a small city. There's Upper Assisi and Lower Assisi, and it encompasses about 72 square miles with a population of about 22,000 people. Still, it's a working city. I mean, real people live in Upper Assisi and Lower Assisi. Real people live there. The homes in Upper Assisi, where Francis and a lot of the churches, most of the churches are older. I mean, ancient. There are things that go back to the time of Francis and Clare and before, but real people live there. There is a lot of tourism, of course, a lot of shops and cafes and that sort of thing. And then Lower Assisi is a bit more contemporary. Yes, there are older parts of it, but it's where a lot more people choose to live and have, you know, workaday businesses, grocery stores and clothing stores and all those things. But it is a real place with real people. So here's Assisi. This is how it looks today. You see Mount Sabasso in the back. And this is Upper Assisi. You can see this is the Church of St. Clare, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Here's the Basilica of St. Francis is over here. This is the Church of Maria Minerva. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. The streets of Assisi are very, very narrow, right? Weren't really meant for cars to go up and down them. And yet cars do go up and down these streets, amazingly close to whatever little sidewalk there is. You can see a teeny sidewalk here. But this is what most of the town looks like. You often see these murals or mosaics to Mary Mary and Jesus around the town. But again, it's a real working city. Okay. So let me do just a little walkthrough of some of the sacred spaces in Assisi. And I'm doing this ahead of time it gives more context about Francis and Clare. So even though these places came out of Francis and Clare, I think if you understand what's there now, it'll help better understand about Francis and Clare. So this is the Basilica of St. Francis. This was built in honor of St. Francis. And now I have to say, look at the irony. So we know Francis chooses poverty as a lifestyle, and yet there is this enormous church built on this site here. Not only is there this church, the upper church, but there's also a lower church, and below that is Francis's grave. And so there is a huge church that's built into the side of the hill, and it's built in 1228. It's pretty much right after Francis gets canonized as a saint. The site of this, I think, was chosen quite on purpose because this was called Hell Hill, and this was the place in town where people were executed. And Francis, being a person of peace and justice and caring, would have wanted the church to be built here. And so that's where the church is built. A little bit more. So here's the basilica. And again, everyone says Francis would have hated it. This is the main part of the basilica. It's this picture doesn't do it justice. It's enormous. And if you notice, there are frescoes on the walls. Those are by the artist Giotto. And they are the life of St. Francis. We'll talk more about this next week, but the life of St. Francis is pictured in frescoes on these walls. The reason for that, these were done during the Renaissance, but most people of the time didn't read or write. So what was the best way to tell a story about a saint? And it was to have paintings or mosaics or frescoes. So that's the upper church. This is the lower church. Again, very ornate, a lot of frescoes. These aren't Giotto frescoes. They're done by someone else whose name is escaping me right now. But beautifully done, enormous space. And then if you go down one more level, this is the grave site of Francis. Francis is said to be buried under the altar here, along with some of his closest fellow monks that are there. I think of any place Francis would have appreciated, it would be this. It's simple, very simple place. And you can come down here and you can pray at the tomb of Francis. Pilgrims come and visit this. It's an incredible place to see. And a lot of historians think Francis would not like it. However, it's a wonderful tribute to St. Francis, truly. And it's a pilgrimage site, so thousands of people every year go and visit it and pray there. And we've talked about in the past what makes the land holy. It's who comes. So it's people putting their feet down in this place that in part makes it holy. Here's a few of the Giotto frescoes. And again, we'll talk more about this next week. This is part of the story where St. Francis renounces his earthly goods. He takes off all his clothes that his father has given him and does it in the middle of the town square. This is his dad over. This is his father over here, not happy. And he takes a life of poverty. This is the ascension of, or the Francis and God having a conversation. And this one is Francis giving his cloak to a poor person. These are incredible, incredible frescoes. And again, these photos really don't do it justice. Okay, then there is also the Basilica of St. Clare. This is what the exterior looks like. It's Romanesque basilica. There's pink stone and white stone. I think the building has been cleaned, and so now you can really see the pink stone if you were to go there now. The bones of St. Clare were missing for a lot of years, but they have been miraculously found and placed in the Basilica of St. Clare. One of the important things about this church is that, do you see this cross here? This is said to be the cross of Saint Damien. And this is the cross that Francis was praying in front of, where God spoke to him and told him to rebuild the church, rebuild my church. Just keep those words in mind. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. So Francis had a conversation with God, and God spoke to Francis, rebuild my church. It's falling into ruin. Okay. This is San Damiano. This is the place that where St. Clare ended up living her life and starting her order of Franciscan nuns, the Poor Clares. You can tour this building, walk through it, and this would have been the courtyard where the nuns would have walked. Quite an interesting building. And this is the place, this is the dormitory on the second floor. Clare, in her poverty, didn't have a special room, didn't have a special bed. She slept with all the other sisters in this dormitory. They had little mats on the floor, and this is where Clare is said to have slept and died. And so again, pilgrims go here and pray to St. Clare. It's quite a feeling to go here and just stand and be witness to what is said to be the place where she slept and she died with her other sisters in the room. Nothing special for Clare. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Clares, Poor Clares, are an existing order of nuns. They're contemplative nuns. They do still live in Assisi. They don't live here anymore, but they do live adjacent to the Basilica of St. Clare. And when you go to the Basilica for Vespers or Compline, you hear this beautiful singing, women's voices, beautiful singing, but you don't know where it's coming from. You can't see it. And that's because the Clares are behind a screen. And the screen opens up so that you can hear their voices, but you can't see them. They take a vow of being contemplatives, and so they're not out and about in the world. They work within their convent. They pray for people. So again, just an interesting carryover from the time of Francis and Clare. Folks doing okay? All right. Here's the Cathedral of San Rufino. Talked about this before, named after the bishop. This is where Clare and Francis are baptized. Still there, a long walk up the hill in Assisi to get there. Interesting church to visit. And then this is the Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. And this really goes to how old Assisi is. So this was a site, a first century BC Roman temple. And they think it was dedicated to Hercules, but they call it the Santa Maria, Saint Mary Minerva, because, and I think sopra means high, above. Santa Maria sopra Minerva because they found a statue of Minerva when they were renovating this. It was renovated by the Franciscans. So this is an example of where holy sites are built on holy sites. Really interesting. Notice the columns of the church here. And you walk inside, and it is now a church dedicated to St. Mary. And then this is my favorite. This is my favorite. This is the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels. This is in Lower Assisi. It is an enormous, enormous building, right? Pilgrims come here, totally pack the place. But the really interesting thing I find about this is that there is a church within the church. The Porziuncola. See this little church in there? This is said to be the church that Francis rebuilt when he got this message from God, rebuild my church. So this is the church that one of the churches that he built. This is the interior. It's a very tiny little space. And this whole church of Santa Maria of the Angels is built around it with this in the center. Tribute to Francis. So talk about the Feast of St. Francis. It happens every year in Assisi. These are some pictures of the festival of October 2023. Everybody comes, people come from all over the world. Dignitaries come for the Feast of St. Francis. Here we are. I've tried to go for the Feast of St. Francis to Assisi. Impossible to get a hotel room, impossible. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Francis and Clare. There's a quote by author Wendy Murray, who wrote a book about Clare. And she says, you cannot dream of Francis without Clare, and you cannot dream of Clare without Francis, that they are inextricably together in the work that they've done. And so often it's all about Francis, right? It's all about Francis, and no one really talks about Clare. I don't think there's a festival or a feast day of St. Clare in Assisi. It's all about Francis, and everyone knows about Francis, but they were contemporaries. Francis started the male order of the Franciscan friars. Clare starts the women's order of Franciscan nuns. So they are contemporaries. And also, Francis dies years before Clare does. And Clare continues the work of Francis and continues her own work. And so I think sometimes she gets written out of the picture. There's many reasons, and we'll talk about those, but she gets written out of the picture sometimes without getting her due. These are some different depictions of Francis and Clare. Here they are together. Here they're kind of making eyes at each other. Anyway, different depictions of Francis and Clare. But you have to look at both of them together to fully understand the movement that they were part of. Okay. So, as I said, they're co-founders of the Franciscan order. They're contemporary, and there are today contemporary followers of Clare and Francis all over the world. There are Franciscan friars, there are Franciscan nuns, and there are third order Franciscans who are lay people, but who choose to live the rule of St. Francis as best they can. And Franciscans are about love and following God and loving all of creation. They identify with the poor, huge dedication to creation care, and they really believe that all people are siblings in Christ. And if you go to a Franciscan convent or you stay at a Franciscan guest house, hospitality is key. And I have stayed in a guest house in Assisi, St. Anthony's guest house in Assisi. It's run by Greystone nuns who come out of Seattle, Washington, of all places, but they embrace the Franciscan lifestyle. And when you go to their guest house, the sisters who run it will meet you at the door, and they greet you with a hug, and in the Italian custom, a kiss on both cheeks of your face. Um, and you are welcomed in. And that is part of living into the rule of Francis and Clare. They really do live their lives as followers of Jesus in the Gospels. And sometimes Franciscans may run counter to popular thought, because Clare and Francis did. You know, Francis rejected his family and his background and his wealth. And Clare did something similar, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Okay, so a little bit more about Francis. So he dies when he's 45. He's 12 years older than Clare. We know he's born in Assisi, and he's intrigued with Mount Subasso, which is the mountain range there. And it's said to be a mystical mountain where people have visions or they have insights. He lives in the lower part of down, Il Sotto, Sotto in Italian, lower, under. And that's where the merchants and the professional people live. We know he's the son of a wealthy cloth merchant. His father goes to France. It's said that his mother was an early pilgrim to Jerusalem, something very different than we think of women of the time. He was also said to be very flamboyant, king of the party, loved to dress up, loved to have fun, said to be a womanizer. He had a lot of money and he spent it very freely, and that was his lifestyle. And then, because of his wealth of coming from a merchant family, for merchant families, their goal was to be more like noble families, and that meant being a warrior or a soldier. But to do that, you had to be able to afford a horse and armor and a sword and all that. His family could. So he's trying to move up the notch, right? And so he gets these items of clothing of war and he goes to war. The first war he goes to is against he goes to war against nobles who want to reclaim their homes in Assisi, and then he goes to another war. Anyway, the war that he's in, where he goes to reclaim homes in Assisi, he's taken prisoner. And the folks who take him prisoner, which are the nobles, see that he has this fancy suit, and they realize his family has a lot of money. So he gets ransomed, and his father pays the ransom, and he comes home for a year to recover. And it's said that during that time, he does some rethinking in his life, and he's depressed, they say, in part because he feels like he came home in shame. And then and secondly, he just doesn't, like people who experience war, and you see the atrocities of war, and I think about what folks are going through right now in Israel and Gaza, seeing the horrors of war and what that might do to a person or traumatize the person. And I think that might be what's happened to him. And so it's said that he gets a call to conversion and he starts thinking more about God. So this is where Francis goes to pray, and he's praying in front of the cross of St. Damien. And this is where he has the vision where God tells him, rebuild my church, rebuild my church. It's falling into ruin. Coincidentally, at the same time, the Pope at the time is also having a dream of Francis holding up the church. This is a Giotto fresco that's in the Basilica of St. Francis. So the Spirit is moving in Francis, and the Spirit is moving in the Pope. I love Giotto's fresco. They don't quite have dimension and how bodies would actually work quite down yet in the style of the work that they're doing. And I love how the Pope is sort of sleeping on an angle like this, and Francis is holding up the tilting church. And but we know that's not exactly what God was telling Francis or the Pope. But Francis takes it literally, and he really believes his call is to rebuild the church. And so he rebuilds San Damiano, which is the place where Clare goes to have her monastery. And then he rebuilds this little church in St. Maria of the Angels. He builds those two churches. It's said that he built a third church, or rebuilt a third church, which was lost. And no one knows where that church is. Now, there's more to come on Francis. We'll talk more in depth next week. And I want to talk a little bit about Clare. So Clare is 12 years younger than Francis. She's from a noble class. She lives in Upper Assisi, higher up on the hill. It's the place where the aristocrats lived. And her expectation was for her to marry within her class, right? Families came together, wealthy families. They married. It was not always marriage about love, but it was marriage of power, right? Families joined together. And her father and her uncle and her mother try to get her to marry. And there's several suitors out there for her, but she's been listening to Francis. Francis is out there preaching in Assisi, and she's listening to his message about living a life of poverty and serving the poor and praying, and she's touched by this. Anyway, when her parents want her to get married, she's 14, which was the custom of the time. So she puts them off for several years, or a few years, but she really doesn't want to marry. She wants to live a religious and spiritual life. And so she decides that she's going to dedicate her life to God and poverty and helping others. So you can imagine how this idea went over with her family. And how does she get away from her family? Well, there is an event that happens. It happens on Palm Sunday. So Francis has this group of monks that he lives with and shares a life with, and they hatch a plan that they are going to kidnap Clare from her family and hide her until Clare can dedicate herself to God. And so on Palm Sunday, they go to Clare's house, the other Franciscan friars, and they take Clare and they take her away, and they take her to San Damiano, and there she kind of makes these vows. And Francis cuts her hair. You know, that's what used to happen when people would go into a convent. The women, their hair would be cut and they'd put a veil on. And she dedicates her life to God. Now, please don't see Clare as this subservient person, because I think sometimes we look at even pictures of her and she looks kind of meek and mild sometimes. She's not. She's a young woman who I think is determined to live the life that she wants to live, and it's contrary to the things of the time. We know eventually that Clare becomes the abbess of the Franciscan Poor Clares, and there is much more to her story as well, and we'll talk more about that next week. So, when we come next week, we'll talk more about Clare and Francis in depth. We'll talk about Franciscan spirituality. We'll talk about lessons for our own time. And I'm wondering if you have questions or comments or further interest, things I didn't cover. Is there anything that you discovered about Francis and Clare that you didn't know?
A lot of things.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of things.
Mhm. Very interesting story, and especially the relationship between the two.
Yes.
Look forward to hearing more about that. And
Yeah,
so
I did not know they were contemporaries.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and there actually is a good story that the historians tell, is that after Clare goes into this monastery that she starts, she really wants to have in-person conversations with Francis. And Francis is so busy out preaching that he doesn't have time to come and see her. And she's a contemplative, so she can't go out and about very freely.
right.
And she keeps inviting him to come and talk, and he's too busy. And she gets very mad at him, right? What's the matter with you? So again, the humanity, how human the saints are. is something that's fascinating to me, right? Human beings.
We know,
Go ahead,
Ramona,
Steve.
yeah, Francis was not that old when he died, but in his
No,
40s.
he was in his 40s. Yeah.
What did he die of? Was disease
Um,
or?
I think it's probably what they called consumption, something like tuberculosis, or I will look that up,
Old
Steve.
age.
Yeah,
Old
well,
age.
again, right.
Yeah.
People didn't live very long. I mean, he
Right.
would have been considered to lived a decently long life. Clare, being 56 when she died, lived a long life in those
Yeah.
times. But
Well,
I will look
and
that
she
up.
was so unwell.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly, Angie. That's right. She was unwell, and it said that she lived about half of her life kind of laying in bed.
Oh,
That she
Oh.
wasn't able to move around. She had some sort of disease that maybe arthritis but some sort of crippling disease where it made her was very difficult for her to move, but that she continued to stay in the dorm on her mat and kind of was the abbess of the monastery from there, did her work from there.
Hmm.
Oh. Have any of you been to Assisi? Meredith, have you been?
No.
No? Has anyone been?
well,
No.
No.
Well, it's if you ever get a chance to go, it's an amazing place. And most people just go for the day, right? So there's these tour buses that come into Lower Assisi, and you get on these little shuttle buses and you go up there and you walk through the town and you see the churches, and then at 5 o'clock, everybody leaves the town and goes away. But the real magic of Assisi is to stay there for a few days, where you can walk the streets, you can experience the quiet at night, the sun rising in the morning, that you can walk the pilgrimage path from the Basilica of St. Francis to St. Clare to Santa Maria, to go to the castle called La Rocca, the Rock, which was the fortress there, to see the olive groves, to experience somewhat of what Francis would have experienced, to have time to have contemplation and prayer. That's the magic of it. That's where you really get the sense of what it was like. One of my favorite places on earth. I love Assisi.
when were you there, Ramona?
Let's see. I was there the last time about 12 years ago. Wanted to go back, was planning to go back, and then COVID hit. So I'd still like to go. There was a terrible earthquake there in Assisi in the early 2000s, I think. Am I remembering that right? And Assisi sits on an earthquake fault.
Oh,
And it was a horrible earthquake. And part of the ceiling of the Basilica of St. Francis fell in. The Basilica of St. Clare was so damaged that they had to bolt. They took iron bolts and bolted the tower, and the church was closed for several years.
Wow.
wow.
And the guest house that I stay in, which was an ancient building, St. Anthony's, their house shook so bad that when the engineers came down and looked at the foundation, they realized that there was no mortar, that it had been built originally on layer after layer of rock that was just pressed down. There was no mortar.
Jeez.
And that whole building had to be jacked up and then new foundations poured, and many, many buildings like that had to be shored up and repaired. So, and I imagine those things happened during the time of Francis and Clare too. It's on an active earthquake site. So, the food in Assisi is very good. The best beef steak, because the cattle in Italy are grass-fed, and the meat is very, very good. Of course, the pasta is delicious. Probably not telling you something you don't know.
The wine might be
wine?
good.
How about
Wine
the
might be
wine?
good too.
So the wine is very, very good. Yeah. And in fact, if you go, happy hour in Italy, you go and they put little appetizers out like peanuts and cicciris, which are beans, these little lupino beans and little pieces of bread with melted cheese on and olives. And so this is put on the bar and then you order whatever you're drinking. And you have a lovely evening, right?
Sounds good.
And then you go to eat dinner about 8 o'clock or 8:30.
Yeah,
If you
right.
go any earlier, they look at you like you're crazy.
Oh,
Yeah.
8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
Cool.
well, any other questions?
When do we leave?
I know. Like I'm thinking we should do a pilgrimage, right?
Yes.
Do a
Sure.
pilgrimage to Assisi. We could go to Rome and Assisi, and we could go to Florence, and there's so much to see, right?
Mhm.
Well,
Amen.
thank you. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. And
Thanks a
again,
lot, Ramona.
we'll have
Thank you.
part 2 next week. More to learn.
All right.
Great stories, great miracles, and great paintings next week, and Franciscan spirituality as well.
Awesome.
Great, great.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
I want
you.
to say hi, Liz. I hope you're feeling better. We
Oh,
miss
yeah.
you.
A little bit. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. And
Oh.
so
Again.
Oh.
So.
I'm having more blood work done.